Thank you for coming for the last session of the conference. Really appreciate your sticking it out till the end. One of the most important issues in labor, when you ask someone what do, they tend to tell you their occupation. So this session is all about occupations and what factors influence occupations. And I want to thank Lin Zhu at University of Minnesota Duluth, our sister school, a little bit further north of Minneapolis. I'm from the University of Minnesota, and we'll have 4 papers and only one discussant. John McCarthy, unfortunately, due to a health issue and his family, could not make it today. But we will have the 4 papers, and I'll be a little more liberal in terms of giving people about 5 minutes extra, but that's it, in order to get all the papers and to make sure that people in the audience have a chance to ask questions. And hopefully what I plan to do is have the paper presented and then have some discussion right after the paper. So it's fresh in people's minds. So I will try to monitor the discussion as well. I will also monitor the chat room. So if there are questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll try to serve as a consolidator of the questions. And I'll have the individuals who ask the questions, I will call on them to ask them as well. So want to again thank you for coming, and thank you for organizing the session. And the discussant, Erin Sojourner from the University of Minnesota Carlson School, will serve as a discussant. So with that, want to introduce the first paper by Tingting Zhang at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Heterogeneous Returns of Acquiring Occupational Credentialing at Different Age and Prevalence of Engaging in Entrepreneurial Activities. So thank you, Tingting, and we'll look forward to your presentation. And also following that, Erin Sojourner's discussion.
You're muted, Tingting.
How about that?
Yeah, good.
Okay, good.
Good.
Thanks, Maurice, for kindly chair this session, and thank you, Liang, for organizing this session. You can see that the title of the paper kind of like changed slightly from the program, and I have to apologize. This is a kind of very preliminary work because I was unable to access the master data file because whatever different issues, there are multiple issues that I wasn't able to access the master file at this point. So all the results are based on the public user file. So some of the topic that I tried to cover in this particular session was not able to present at this point. So, but I think I get pretty good sense in terms of what I want to talk about today. And to motivate this paper, I want to show this little picture that I draw from the US Senate report in 2017. This is a report that specifically focused on the kind of like older workers, like in terms of what's going on in the US current labor market. And they pretty much trace the share of workers like by different age, you know, since 1988 and provide also kind of like projections till 2026. And in other kind of Bureau of Labor Statistics report, you can see the workforce composition projections all the way up to 2030 and 2040. The bottom line is that the US workforce is aging, right? Like this is kind of something that we keep talking about, but this picture laid out like how politicians and the lawmakers start looking into these issues and really start thinking, you know, how do we adjust our labor policies to make sure that we respond to this population kind of change. Another kind of known fact in the US labor market, which Morris is the kind of the leading figure for this line of research, is that we know in the US and also in many other developed countries that people are getting more and more non-degree credentials, right? Like Morris studied occupational licensing, other folks like study different type of non-degree credentials and really link them to their labor force, labor market outcomes. I don't have a specific figures, although I really love to show the Morris figures in this line, but the current statistic shows that 22% of US labor force, active labor force, hold at least one kind of like a non-degree credentials, or at least a part of licensing, right? And if we look at the number of different kind of credentials that available or exist in the US, the Credentialing website reported 500,000 different type of work-related credentials that being kind of like available in the US. And so what I try to do in this particular project is try to link this to kind of like a known fact, right? Our populations are aging, and also folks are more likely to get different type of work credentials, license, certification, all those things, and connect them together to see like do occupational non-degree credential provide different returns for people at different life stage. And the specific research I try to ask in this particular presentation is, are workers at different age benefit the same from obtaining a non-degree work credential, and can holding a work credential mitigate the disadvantages that older workers experience in the labor market? So that's how I kind of try to connect this two lines of literature and fill in the gap. To give you a little bit kind of research preview without giving out too much kind of explorer, the bottom line is, based on the study I kind of conducted at this point, earning a non-degree work credential helps, right? Like, if you want to engage in the labor market, if you want to get a better outcome in the labor market, earning a non-degree work credential definitely helps, but not as much as the older workers. So this is something that I want to continue to explore in the near future. In terms of literature review, what we found, as I alluded at the beginning of this presentation, is that we know that older workers are more likely to work compared to maybe like 10, 20 years ago, right? Like, the reason that like we see more and more like a larger share of older workers in the labor market, because first, we have a big labor shortage, particularly like has been exacerbated by the pandemic, right? Like we talk about the great resignation, and a lot of parts that, employers try to increase wages and to fill those labor shortage. So they have space and a kind of preference in terms of bring the older workers back or maintain them in the workforce. And also there's a kind of a huge trend in terms of saying that, we need to bring more diversity in our organizations. So older workers are definitely part of like, the diversity initiative. And from the organizational literature, we start talking about, older workers, they have those ties of corporation knowledge, and they also have work experience. Those things needs to be preserved and need to be embraced in our organizational practices. So we need to kind of like really keep them and in the workforce. From the supply side, we also see that first, increasing life expectancy, right? Like if folks, they are healthier, they are more able to work, they perceive work as part of like, their self-identity, and, so they would like to work. And also there's a kind of like, financial reasons. The Great Recession definitely caused a lot of people postpone their retirement. And right now, like we see, because of the kind of financial structures and financial burdens, some people prefer to work longer. So overall, like from the both supply side and the demand side, we can see that there's an increasing share of older workers. But the downside about this is that we see still like the huge kind of discussion in terms of age discrimination. Even though we have federal, state laws that really saying that you should not discriminate, you cannot, it's illegal to discriminate against older workers. And we see that corporations very cautious about doing things like, certain HR practice has been implemented to really avoid and any sign of age discrimination, but still like we see substantive like experiment evidence to see like people still, have a difficulty to get into a job if they are older, relatively older, and also older workers report longer average unemployment duration as well. So a lot of things that are happening that we try to explain, like both in the economic field and in other kind of management or adjacent fields, talking about the stereotypes, the discriminations, but on the counter side, a bunch of literature talking about like, older workers are less likely to get reemployed, can get upskilled and reskilled because the employers are less motivated to provide those training opportunities. It's not like they are less of the workers' lack of willingness or motivations to really engage those opportunities. Is the employers, they actually, even though they keep them in unemployment, they don't want to offer those opportunities. So that's kind of like the literature scheme that we see in terms of older worker and their participation in labor market and engage in training opportunities. That's the broader literature that we see over there. And on the other side, when we talk about credential, right, like, occupation licensing, certification, all those things, we can consider them as a signal, right? This human capital theory apply for this, and the signaling theory also apply for this. They also work in the same direction, saying that if you acquire a non-degree work credential, you're more likely to better off. We can use the credential to signal that you have the experience, you have the competence, and we also can use the credential to really signal that you are able to conduct the work. This is particularly kind of attractive to, I would say, older workers, because for younger workers, they have the opportunity and options to engage in degree education, right? But for older workers, getting into a stop work and from like, stop working completely and go back to school might not be a viable or attractive options because of the huge opportunity cost. For them, those kind of like a skill-related, a job-related, like a really quick, part-time, self-initiated credentialing from the non-degree side would be more attractive. And also we have abundant literature that research has supported that occupational licensing and other non-degree work credential actually provide the opportunity to narrow those gaps between kind of like a mainstream workers and those relatively disadvantaged group, right? Like we have a study to show that the female-male gender gap, wage gap can be narrowed by occupational licensing. Kind of racial minority workers get more kind of like a compensations relative to their counterpart without occupational licensing, and also immigrants can really address this issue. So in a sense, we see that those non-degree credentials provide a kind of vehicle or channels for those disadvantaged workers to be able to level in their field. Of course, there's a caveat, right? Like we also have research evidence to say that those disadvantaged groups that could not have the same access to those non-degree credentials, but nonetheless, once they get in, they still can do much better than people without the non-degree credential. So following the same logic, we consider the older workers who are discriminated against are kind of somehow disadvantaged in the labor market, similar as like, the females, racial minorities, or immigrants. So if they acquire a kind of non-degree work credential, from our perspective, it should have the similar effect, right? You are being discriminated against at a later age of your life if you try to get a new job, or if you try to kind of like get different line of work, and maybe work credential, non-degree work credential can help you to really bridge this gap and help you mitigate the kind of negative effect. So that's the kind of like a theoretical framework that we try to address in this part of study. Of course, the first line of like an empirical method that we try to understand is like, is this really a thing? Like, right, if we assume that the non-degree credential can help older workers to benefit a little bit more in a disadvantaged labor market, then we need to get a sense, like, do they really kind of like acquiring the non-degree work credential at the same level or differently, right? So this is the kind of like the linear probability model. We try to get a sense, like, do they actually acquire things at the same page or different pace? Of course, the next step we try to understand, right? Like, do actually people getting a credential at different age result kind of like different labor market outcomes? So that's kind of like the general picture of our empirical method. Here, I apologize for the small font, but I really like to put this kind of table to the place to show folks that what's the available data that we can access in terms of studying non-degree credential and in the US, right? So like this list of all the kind of Bureau of Labor Statistics data that has the question about occupational licensing and certification across all different kind of data set, right? So thanks to Morris, big shout out to him. He's the kind of person that really kind of like, pushed the Census Bureau to add those questions to current population-based surveys. So we are able to really deliver more accurate and precise research in this line of work, occupation impact of occupational licensing and certification. Most of the study that since 2015, 2013-ish that use this group of data set. But the Gemini table has a really, really good summary in terms of what type of questions are being asked in each separate kind of like a population surveys. And I want to draw your attention to the adult training and education survey. This is the survey that I'm currently using for this particular presentation, because this is the survey they actually ask the individual about their top 3 most important non-work degree credential and what year they kind of acquired those credentials. And those kind of questions were not available in kind of the most popular surveys like CPS or like a SIPP, like, the labor market research that we currently rely on. And this is kind of the unique part. There are only 2 data sets currently ask about what year that you can you acquire this particular credential. The other one is the one at the kind of below that. That's the National Survey of College Grads. Like, I'm also using that data a little bit, but not in this public current research. My point is that ATES is the best available data to conduct this research in the US right now, because they literally ask you, what do you think is the most important credential for you, non-degree credential? And most of people answer this question saying that this is important because of my job. And they also ask, what year this particular credential did you acquire? And most of people, when they answer this important credential questions, they also answer like what year. And I was able to triangulate like this information and with people's age to construct some kind of critical independent variables that I was using in this particular line. And something that I want to highlight at the bottom is the new line of survey that being implemented this year. I was hoping that this new survey would draw this particular training and the labor market kind of like information, and with more kind of advanced understanding. So I'm excited about this new research.
5 minutes.
Yep. And I will skip this, go directly to the results section. So linear probability tells us that exactly what we anticipate, right? Like, as you're aging, you are less likely to acquire any work credential. And this kind of like a more closely related to the license part, because more closely related to the credential part, because it looks like the certification is less required and more voluntary. So individuals might have more kind of like a tendencies if they perceive this this particular credential can provide some add-on. So you can see as you age, you're more likely to get certification relatively to not getting the certification. And in terms of labor market impact, and this is the first part, I start looking at the labor force participation, right? With controlled and uncontrolled. Sorry, there's a little typo there. Column 2 is regression with fully controlled demographics and job-related characteristics. And we can see that if you talk about getting a credential at a later age, they still generate some kind of positive impact, right? Compared to people who do not have any work credential, even you are close to the retirement age, you are 9.4% more likely to get a job. So that's something that really, really encouraging. And then I split this into 2 sets, right? The first set is the age group that you are getting this important work credential, but the second part is how recent you getting this particular credential. What we found here is that when you close to the retirement age, the kind of positive impact of getting a work credential for your employment is kind of driven by if you're getting something really recent, right? Between 0 to 2 years, less than 2 years, then that's the positive impact we got. If you kind of having if you are a relatively senior person and then you get a very long-term, you are holding a very long-term credential, the kind of labor force kind of, I would say bonus was not there, right? So that's something that really interesting to me. If I start looking at other kind of labor market outcomes, right? The probability to get a full-time job and probability to get some kind of temporary arrangement, probability to get multiple jobs, working in multiple jobs, log weekly hours, log weeks works per year, and also the annual earnings. Those are the things that provided in the ATF, ES. And what I found is the age benefit for labor market was not there, but somehow if you get a relatively fresher credential, you are able to mitigate slightly in terms of the negative kind of impact that you experience as a senior person in the labor market. Okay, so that's kind of the overall finding that we got. So conclusion, workers are less likely to obtain a work credential and training as they grow older, especially when they close to the retirement age, when we talk about 50 to 65, this group. And also workers who earn a non-degree work credential at a later stage of life do not benefit as much if they kind of get this around their 20s or early 30s. And there's a curvy linear positive return for the duration to hold those degrees. So apparently there's a kind of positive return at the very beginning when you have when you just freshly get this degree credential, non-degree credential, and then the return kind of decrease a little bit and then go up if you get this holding this degree, a non-degree work credential for more than 10, 11 years up to 20 plus years. But I want to kind of make a statement that none of this causal relationship, and I really hope we can get a causal relationship, but with the current data limitation, that's how much we can push this understanding. And I hope that with a more rigorous experimental design that we actually kind of follow the US, try to collect some data in Canada and in China as well. And hopefully we can come back and report something better. But in terms of contribution, this is a very first kind of research that try to connect these two things together. But I also want to really highlight a little bit, just last 30 seconds to highlight the policy implication here. We have been talking about upskilling and the reskilling very, very heavily in the past couple of years. And we have been talking about, how do we bring the older workforce and really make them to catch up with the future of work, right? So I think that there are some policies should be in place to really support older workers for their kind of like, educational experience or educational things like training kind of effort. And because we see positive returns on the labor force participation, but we really don't see much in the intensive margin. So I think there's some kind of discussions that we can come and get there. So that's the presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you very much. We'll go with our first discussant. Erin Sojourner from University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, Carlson School of Management. And thank you for agreeing to be a discussant.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Morley. It's good to read the paper, learn some things, and wanted to congratulate Tingting on her work so far. There's more to do, as she said. It's an early pass at it, but basically the question, as she already told you, is how do the associations of credential holding with labor market outcomes differ by worker age and by elapsed time since getting the credential? That's kind of the empirical question and theoretical question she's asking. And I think the main contributions, so I always think about contributions of a paper, can come from asking a new question, can come from developing new theory, can come from bringing new data to an old question or an old theory. Those are the main things here, and or maybe like new methods, applying new methods to new econometric or analytic methods. I think the innovations here are sort of looking at new data, and I wasn't 100% clear like how new the question was. I think it was novel. I don't have the sense that there was a ton of other evidence about this, especially not the sort of elapsed time, because that's, I think, really what the new data allowed, is measurement of this elapsed time to credentialing. So that's interesting, because we know, skills depreciate over time, and certification, technologies change and expertise becomes less, as work processes change. Being expert in something 10 years ago is maybe not the same as being expert. It's not as valuable as being expert in it today. So it is an interesting question, and but I didn't get a super clear sense of what the new data were going to help us with until partway through the paper. So that's just a very minor presentational issue, but just being clear about like the source of the contribution. Again, this is early work, but there were there's a few conceptual pieces. Conceptually, it's pretty straightforward. There's a non-degree to credential, there's age, there's time between age and when you got the credential, and then there's labor market outcomes. And labor market outcomes are a complex construct, but roughly you can think about it are they working, and how much are they getting per hour of work? So that's the extensive margin and the intensive margin, roughly. And so she's still working her way through the data, and she's looking at robustness to different measures and making sure patterns are consistent. But in the end, if I have a theory about if my construct is non-degree credentials and I have two different measures of it, I think it was good when you showed the any credential, because you're saying I have these two multiple measures of the same construct, and I'm going to pool the information together. And you can do that, I think, also with the the employment and with the, because you have a bunch of different kinds of employment measures. So, you can create an index out of them and gain power. I would also say that looking at hourly wages is interesting on its own. And it's different than earnings or hours, because like as a worker, you want higher wage, you want higher hourly compensation for your work. Like that's good for you on its face, because that means you have to give up less time to earn the same amount of money. So earnings is kind of a messy thing that's like mixes how much time did I sell and how much did I get per hour. And so anyway, I think wages are an interesting especially interesting outcome. Just, in the interests of like tying the data to the theory and in the interest of keeping the flow of the paper concise, just in general, I'm always trying to narrow the number of measures I have or pool the number of measures I have of the same construct, center the description on that like pooled thing. And then maybe in robustness, I'm disaggregating it and saying like, if there's something interesting about, the different submeasures. In terms of, again, like, this is just like, again, an early draft, and I know, this is not a final draft, but again, just in terms of how I think about writing these things is like, you don't have to describe every stat in a table in the text. You just have to give the readers like a way to verify that they can interpret the table correctly. So like describe one statistic in the table and how to interpret it, and then say everything else you can see in the table. And if you want to and discuss like key results that have meaning. But there were times when the text was describing a lot of the statistics in the tables just sort of in a very rote way. I know that's, not going to be in the later version, but, a lot of the motivation was like pre-pandemic motivation. During the pandemic, there's been a change. I mean, the data is pre-pandemic, so it makes sense to set it up in the context in which it was generated. But, if you're using this to recommend things for the future or for policy, then, we're in a somewhat different context where we've had, more than 3 million people aged 55 and older kind of leave the labor force and say they don't want a job anymore. And,
2 minutes to finish up.
Yeah, thanks, Morley. So I would just try to figure out how to bridge that gap a little bit. It's not easy because your data is cross-sectional in 2016, but at least in terms of the motivation, I think the idea of like bringing older workers back into the labor force is a huge issue for the economy. Like, how do we do that? Because a lot of them have, the health risks have cut harder for older Americans. And so they have disproportionately withdrawn from the labor force. And bringing them back is a big part of the question of whether we're going to get back towards where we were before or not. And it's not obvious that we want to, but certainly like the pandemic also forced a lot of organizations to change the way they work and invest in remote work options, which are safer, in a pandemic. And so like focusing on things like helping older workers learn technologies that facilitate remote work might be a productive avenue to explore or at least discuss. So not so much like certification of exact job task skills, but more like ways of working. So I'll stop there. Thank you. It was very interesting, and I look forward to seeing where it goes.
Thank you, Erin. Any questions of either the discussants or Tingting? Do you want to respond to anything Erin had to say?
Yeah, while we're waiting for additional questions, I want to thank you, Erin, for those really insightful feedback. I want to mention two things that I heard in the feedback. So the first thing, like Erin made a really good point about there are multiple constructs in the non-degree credential, right? I talk about occupational licensing, I talk about certification. That's the two best measured kind of like a non-degree work credentials in our current kind of like any data kind of survey explorations. There are additional things, right? Like a certificate, like a boot camp, like all those courser type of like courses, and we all consider them non-degree credential, and the ways to really bring the additional education or trainings to workers. But it's really hard, and it's a complex field. So there's something I definitely can work on to kind of like get a better capture on that particular construct. And I totally agree with you that hourly wage is a really good measure. Unfortunately, the public use file, the ACE, does not have that particular question. That's the reason that, and also another reason that I want the master file, because I can get into whether this person is self-employed or the entrepreneur-ish type of job. So go back to the early question about the hourly wage, if I have the master file, I should be able to calculate the kind of computed hourly wage that could potentially address this recommendation. So
do you have, I thought you had hours and earnings though, right?
Yeah, I had hours and earnings, but in the kind of the hours is continuous. The earning is kind of like they give me the bracket. So it's categorical, and I have to kind of do a little bit of imputation to get the continue and do the calculation. I didn't really get a chance to get into the detail, but the master file should give me the continuous measure of the earnings. Thank you.
I saw Yang had her hand up. Question?
Yeah, so Tingting, thank you for sharing your very interesting work. So I have a question about the different effect across the different industries and occupation, because I see maybe you already controlled for that variable, but I may expect that certain occupations are more vulnerable to technology change. So for example, if you are a computer programmer, and I expect that your skills are more likely to be outdated versus if you are a teacher, maybe it won't make a big difference. And also, since you mentioned the age discrimination, I think if you are like a manual labor and you are more likely to be discriminated as your age, but if you are for example, teacher, your experience will be more valuable at your age. So I wonder whether you have found different effect across workers' occupation and across the industry.
Thank you, Duanyi. This is a really good question. So far in the analysis, I controlled the industry and occupational fixed effect, but definitely I think the heterogeneous kind of analysis is the next step to go on. The challenge is really getting into like the nitty-gritty in terms of what industry, like how do we define this, right? Like, you know, what industry has more age discrimination, or what occupation has more age discrimination, or what kind of occupations that their skills are more likely to kind of like get outdated over time. So far the literature, I don't see a clear cut in terms of how we kind of like parsing the different groups so we can get a clear understanding in terms of the subgroup effect. But I think that's definitely something I would like to try when I push this line of work. Thank you.
There's another question by Cesar Montalvo. If you could ask the question, you can go ahead and ask it. It's in the chat room.
Yeah, thank you. I saw the question is about industry, the difference between industry and occupation.
Right.
It's kind of like a continue on to to the discussion in terms of what kind of non-degree credentials that potentially different people at different age can engage in, right? Like it makes sense that younger workers are more likely to get into the healthcare because it takes a lot of time to acquire those non-degree credential. Maybe older workers do not like to spend a lot of time or effort to get those, but we don't have a lot of information in terms of age preference, in terms of different workers continuing in different type of occupation. I can give you one example that we observed on the ground, like when I do kind of qualitative research, we observe a lot of like a African-American kind of like a females, they start acquiring education license in their 40s and 50s, hoping that they can get into the teacher's occupation and increase their income and labor market outcome. And somehow they were not able to place themselves to become a teacher. So there are a lot of like, different things happening on the ground. So it's not a pure like a supply or demand story. And sometimes it's just a mismatching story. But yeah, we hope that we can continue to explore this line of work and understand, what's going on the ground.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's move on to our second paper. Good set of discussions. And the second paper is Trust and Trustworthiness in the Employment Relationship, Policy Implications in Yifei Ren and Lin Zhu. Yufei will be presenting. And as he's getting ready, just the fact that I know there's an Industry Studies Association, but given the importance of occupations, next is an Occupational Studies Association. So go ahead.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you for the introduction. And hello, everyone. And my name is Yufei, and today I'm going to present the paper. The name is Trust and Trustworthiness in the Employment Relationship, Policy Implications. So just give me a second. Let me share my screen with everyone. Here we go. Yeah. So as you can see, the topic is about trust and trustworthiness. As we all know, trust and trustworthiness has been a very important research topic, and there has been a considerable amount of researchers study this topic in different fields. And today I'm mainly focused on the literature outside of the economics field since I'm an economist. So in the management literature, according to Gabriel's idea, trust is a combination of three key factors, which are the ability, benevolence, and integrity. So some scholars focus on the positive expectation components of trust and trustworthiness, and the other researchers focus on willingness to be vulnerable in the relationship. And in sociology, scholars tend to view trust as a more general concept. For example, they would like to define a trust in embedded broad question about to what extent do you trust your neighbors, do you trust your government, etc. And in economics, the fundamental idea of trust can be simplified as A trust B to do X. Again, those are the basic definitions, and there are many different variations of these kind of definitions. And one of the main purposes we're interested in trust and trustworthiness, of course, it is about whether the higher level of trust and or trustworthiness could be related to some real business outcomes. So, for example, in the Mayer's 1995 fundamental model, team trust refers to a collective phenomenon that entitle generalized expectation of trustworthiness within the organization and the willingness to accept vulnerability to all the members. Therefore, adding trusters propensities will increase the level of the trust. Therefore, will increase the perceived risk and risk-taking behaviors within the organization, and at the end of the day, affect the total outcomes of the business. Based on that model, empirically, there had been many studies done. People that researchers that already found out, trust propensities between team members generally had positive effects on outcomes, such as job satisfaction, loyalty to the organization, and open communication, knowledge sharing behaviors within the organization, satisfaction with the teamwork, and proactive idea implications, problem solving attitudes, team performance, etc., etc. For most of these studies, their trust measurements are based on different scales, which we're going to discuss in the next slides. On the other side, in the economics literature, there haven't been many studies specific on the relationship between the level of trust and the business outcomes. There was one paper in 2015, Jabel's paper. They used survey questions from a WERS survey, and they using instrument variable, they found out on average a team had a higher level of trust can boost the firm's performance. So they use 3 different types of measure of trust propensities, and also 3 different types of measure of firm's performance, and all of those measurements are coming from the same survey. In terms of the measurements, as we have discussed, in management literature, there have been several different types of well-established scales. So I just briefly listed the name there. In sociology and related literature, as we have mentioned, they are more likely to directly ask, to 1 to 7, 1 to 10, to what level you trust your neighbors, or you think your neighbors are trustworthy, etc., and etc. So in this study, I'm going to mainly talk about, a different type of environment, which is well adopted in the experimental economics world, which is the trust game, or we call it the investment game. So here is a brief introduction of our game setting. It's a very common games in the experimental world. So basically we have 2 movers or 2 players. We call them first mover and second mover. So they have the same endowment at the beginning of the game. And therefore the first mover was told you can send any amount of money to the second mover. And any amount of money sent to the second mover will be tripled and will be received by the second mover. Therefore, after the second mover receives the money from the first mover, which is tripled, the second mover can decide to send any amount back to the first mover. Of course, the second mover also can send 0 back to the first mover. And, if based on basic game theory ideas, first mover should expect second mover send 0 back because there's no way to turn off the offer, and therefore first mover will send 0. But of course, in the real experimental world, that's not the result. So in general, we define how much the first mover send to the second mover as a measurement as a trust, because I'm willing to be vulnerable giving my money to you and let you to decide how much to send back to me. And in the meantime, the ratio of amount of money the second mover sends back to the first movers is always defined as the being trustworthiness one facing first mover's trust. So those indicators are the main measurements we're going to use in our study, trust and trustworthiness. So our data coming from a large-scale survey data with around 2,400 responses, and those responses are recruited from more than 130 stores in fast food chain industries. Except we have our survey measurements, we also very likely got some objective measurements from the company, such as the size of the store, number of employees, the sales data, managers' performance, etc., etc. We're planning to connect the survey data and the objective measurement together and try to build up the relationship in the next few slides. In terms of our design, the way we collect our data, obviously it's very challenging to run experiments between 2,400 employees. So we use a very common, hypothetical experimental design, which means instead of pairing those players together one by one, we just ask them hypothetical questions. first we introduce the framework, then we ask them, what if you are the first mover, what's your plan? If you are the second mover, what's your plan, etc. Specifically, we ask the 4 different types of questions about trust and trustworthiness for each survey answers. And also we vary the roles of the opponents. We have 2 types of cases. In case 1, hypothetically, you are going to interact with your employee, your colleagues, or another randomly employee in your store. At the other one, in the other case, we assume you're going to interact with your supervisors in the store. Here is an example of the questionnaire we're used. So it's case 1. So suppose you're going to play the above game with a randomly select employee from the store that you are working. And we have 4 measurements. So first, if you are the first mover, how much you're going to send to the second mover. This measures the level or tendency of trust for the first mover to the second mover. And the question 2 is about expectation or beliefs. So after the amount has been tripled, how much do you expect the second mover will send back to you? So here is the beliefs about the level of trustworthiness of the second movers. And question 2.1 is, assume you are the second mover, how much do you expect the first mover will send to you? So this one is a belief about the trust, the tendency of the trust, the second mover to the first mover. In general, basically means, on average, how do you believe your colleagues trust you? And the last one is, assume the first mover sends you, 50 RMB, basically the 50% of the endowment, which is slightly lower than the average, higher than the average number we observed. But you receive 150, which is tripled. How much would you send back to the first mover? So that is the measurements of being trustworthiness when you are trusted by your colleagues. So those are our 4 measurements, and we have case 1, you're interacting with another employee, and case 2, you're interacting with your supervisors. Specifically, if you are an employee or a department manager, you're going to be interacting with the store manager or store associate managers. And if you are the store manager, you're going to interacting with the regional managers of the company. So we have different levels of the questionnaires. A brief summary of the summary statistics. So here we list the propensity of trust and being trustworthiness. So we split our sample in 3 groups. So crew members, which we call 0 on the most left panel, and the department managers on the middle, and the store managers, store social managers on the right. So on the left panel, it shows the tendency to trust the other employees. So on average, the crew members and the store managers have relatively lower level of trust towards the employees, and the department managers have a higher level of trust towards random employees. Somehow makes sense because the department manager's daily life involves lots of interaction with the crew members. So that's maybe reason they have a relatively higher level of trust. And in terms of trustworthiness, so when the other employees trust you, to what level you're going to be trustworthy. In other words, if the other people send you a certain amount of money, what is the proportion you're planning to send back to them? It's very interesting, the store managers have the highest level, then followed by the department managers, and the crew members have the lowest level. One explanation is, the store managers, they're taking more higher of responsibility on their daily jobs, and therefore they're more likely to be trustworthiness when facing trust, or they're more used to be in the environment to be trusted by the other members. So here is the data from the case 1. In terms of interacting with their supervisors.
5 minutes to finish up.
Okay, thank you. In terms of interacting with their supervisors, we also found the similar pattern. So I'm going to jump here. The next panel is about the beliefs. It's about the beliefs of your environment. To what level you think the other people trust you, and to what level you think the other people will be trustworthiness. So in terms of your expectation about the other people's attitude, store managers and department managers have the highest level of confidence. In general, they believe the other people are more likely to trust them. But on the other side, they also believe the other people are less likely to be trustworthy. And this result also almost hold the same when they are interacting with their supervisors. The only interesting difference is when interacting with the supervisors, the department managers have higher, beliefs about the trust from the supervisors. One potential explanation is, the social distance between the department managers and the store managers are closer than the store managers and regional managers. So those are the summary statistics. Then we go to our key results, the impacts of our server environments on the objective data. So in the first panel, we focus on the average completion rate of sales. So it's a relative environment we directly get from the company. So that basically tells you, how many percent of the sales has been achieved, in the past year. Its relative environment varies from 60% to 130%. And our control variables are the average work hours, average education levels in the store, and average job tenures in the store. The first two variables have positive impacts, and the last variable has negative impacts, which means, if your employees have longer time working in the company, it's harder to achieve the sales goals. And of course, what we're interested in the trust environments. So as the previous study had shown, the causality effect is confused, is mixed on this case. Therefore, we use the instrument variable method. So our instrument variable in this case is the average marriage rate of the store. On average, how many percent of people get married in this store? So using the instrument variable, we found out, the only significant variable is the tendency for employees to trust their supervisors. It has a positive impact, a significant positive impact on the completion rate of the sales. And for the trust, tendency trust to the other employees and the level of being trustworthiness, they have positive impacts, but they are marginal significant. In terms of another measurements, we look at the turnover rate for the store. We capture the average turnover rate for the store in the past 2 months. We have 127 store data. And we control the similar control variables as we used in the first panel. And but we cannot use the average marriage rate again because that instrument variable has significant impact on the turnover rate. More likely, a higher ratio of people got married, less turnover rate. So we use store average escalatorship index and store average, OCB environments as our instrument variables. And we found out, higher level of trust tendency towards managers. And if you expect more trust from your managers, those stores have relatively lower turnover rates compared to the other stores. So those two factors have significant negative impacts compared to significant negative impacts. The similar pattern also found out when interacting with the other employees. But
2 minutes to finish.
But again, they are marginal significant. And the last variable we're interested in is the performance measurements for the managers. So we have around maybe 300 department store managers and associate store managers. So the company provided 1 to 4 scales of their performance data to us. Therefore, we can use use them as dependent variables. So for the managers, we control the wage of the managers. A higher wage of the manager associated with higher performance. Again, we don't know the causality effect. And the age, the topic related to the previous presentation, older managers have lower performance evaluation, and average age of the employees have positive impacts. And also we we can use all the non-managers average ESCO leadership index and the non-managers employees average manager rate as our instrument variable. And here we only calculate the non-managers employees trust and trustworthiness. And we found out a similar result as the previous one, higher trust towards to the supervisors and expect more trust from supervisors has positive impact on their managers' performance. And another interesting result is being trustworthiness with supervisors also has a positive impact on the manager's performance. So in a short sum, we have a relatively large scale hypothetical experimental study, and we combine the data from our survey measurements and the real objective measurements. And we found out in general, very interesting, among all the 8 measurements we collected, the trust tendency towards to the managers play a consistent and important role. Using instrument variable method, we somehow can build up the causality direction. Higher level trust towards to the managers will bring better performance, lower turnover rate, and also generate a higher, a chance for the manager to get better evaluation results. I think I'm kind of out of time, so.
Yes.
So yeah, the next topic
Thank you.
is going to theoretical.
I wanted to take questions because, as I mentioned, John cannot be here. So if we have a few minutes for questions. Any questions on? Is there a way to this is I'll use the chair's prerogative. Is there a way to measure wages on one axis and trust on the other axis and get some sort of trade-off of trust for wages?
Oh, sorry for the background noise. Yeah, my furnace just turned on. Sorry about that. Hi, Morris. That's a very valuable question. Our trust and trustworthiness measurements is mainly focused on trust towards in people instead of trust. We trust B for be vulnerable on our money. So we kind of hard to build up a theoretical connection between our trust measurements towards to their wages. We could build up another theoretical framework, which is whether you have a higher wage cause you to be more likely to trust your employees and trust your managers, etc. I think that is could be a valuable of a channel of the further study. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and also we have the individual level of salary data, but we haven't reached the analysis at the individual level yet, and except for the manager's performance. That is a more reliable, objective measurements at this stage.
Well, thank you. Excellent presentation and really important research on looking at reliability and trust, and an interesting experiment. Next, we have a former student at the University of Minnesota, and Duanyi Liang, who went to MIT, now is at Cornell. And the question is the gendered consequences of flexible work policies. And we'll look forward to your presentation and delighted to see you again.
Great, thank you, Morris, for the kind introduction. And first of all, I want to thank Liang and Erin for organizing this session. So my name is Duanyi Yang, and I'm an assistant professor at Cornell IR School. And it is a great pleasure for me to be here to share my joint work with my colleagues, Vanessa Conzon, who is also here today. Vanessa is an assistant professor at Boston College. And this paper is also joined with one of my PhD candidate, Dongwoo Park at the Cornell IR School, and Erin Kelly, who is a professor at MIT Sloan School of Management. And our paper investigates the consequences of flexible work policies. And we pay a particular attention to a worker's gender as well as their organizational rank in their professional advancement. So today we think that understanding the importance of flexible work policy is of increasing importance. It is because it has been we have seen more and more organizations adopting those policies in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So usually I think the hope for the organizations to adopt those policies is to retain workers, especially to retain women in the organization, and to allow workers to move ahead in their careers. So although the policy was thought to be designed to help women to advance their career, so when we study this question, we find that the extensive work and family literature actually suggests that using those flexible work policy can lead to negative career consequences, such as lower pay and performance evaluations. And in the literature, I think these negative career consequences is usually referred to as a flexibility stigma. And in particular, scholars have found that compared to men, women are more likely to be expected to face greater risks of their career penalties. It is because that when women use flexible work policy, and it is usually seen as a further evidence of violating the expectations of them being committed workers in the organization. So despite the extensive literature on flexibility stigma, there has been very little research regarding under what conditions do flexible work policies could benefit women. So we think that understanding this within group heterogeneity is particularly important because it can help us identify which subgroup of women experience negative career consequences when they seek flexibility, and which subgroup of women do not experience those penalties. And understanding if and when these policies could harm versus helping those women is important, particularly as more organizations adopt flexible work policies in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. So in this research, we look at how organizational rank that is holding a senior versus junior position in the professional context related to workers' career consequences faced by women. So although the organizational rank has not been previously studied in relation to flexible work policy literature, so we think that organizational power literature has suggested that workers with a higher organizational rank are more likely to have the social as well as the symbolic resources to enact power. And also we find that studies from applied psychology literature have suggested that higher rank is usually associated with workers' greater ability to respond to workplace challenges and to respond to workplace stigma. And whereas the lower rank has been associated with workers' less ability to respond. And in addition, we expect that the junior women are among the most vulnerable group. It is because when they use flexible work policy, they are particularly vulnerable because the junior women are members of two lower status groups on the base of their gender as well as their organizational rank. Therefore, they are particularly susceptible to violate the ideal worker norm when they seek out flexibility. So therefore, we expect that the junior women who enrolled in flexible work policy are most likely to experience career penalties compared to other group of workers in the organization. And to test our hypothesis, we use data from, we call the organization STEMO, which is a STEM organization in the United States with a highly educated and professional workforce. And I want to mention that this organization is a male-dominated organization, but before they adopt flexible work policy, the organization has already adopted a lot of other gender-focused policies to address gender inequality problems. So for example, before the flexible work time policy, the organization has adopted the on-site childcare, and also the woman can enroll in other mentorship programs. And in 2017, this organization introduced a flexible work policy, which in this paper we refer to as FlexIt. So this policy was designed to give workers more control over their work hours by allowing workers to vary the start and to vary the stop time of their hours. And the workers can also vary the total number of hours they worked on a given day. And some people and the workers who enrolled in this program can also work remotely more frequently compared to those people who do not enroll. And the policy was broadly announced to all the workers when when the organization adopted, and the workers were given a very clear way to enroll in the policy. So, so in this study, we utilized two major data sources. The first data source is the administrative data on all employees several years before and 2 years after the policy was introduced. So in this particular study, we used data from 2017, which is 2 years before the policy was 2017, which is the year when the policy was introduced, and to 2019, which is 2 years after the policy was introduced. But this study was conducted before the pandemic. And overall, we have about 464 employees nested in about 46 work units. And we got information about workers' demographic information, as well as their key career outcomes. And in addition, my co-author, Vanessa Conzon, has done extensive field work in this organization. And she has collected about 143 interviews, and she has done approximately 500 hours of participant observations. So for today's presentation, I'm going to focus on the quantitative part of the analysis. But if you have any questions about our quantitative finding, we are happy to answer your questions as well. So in this research, our key dependent variables measures the changes in the three major career outcomes when the policy was first introduced and 2 years after the policy was introduced. So the first variable measures the changes in workers' organizational rank. So for example, moving from rank 9 to rank 10 is considered as a promotion in this organization. And secondly, we measure the changes in their performance evaluation scores. So workers may receive a 0.1 in their evaluation, which means their performance is unsatisfactory, or they may receive a 0.5, which means that they have done an outstanding job in the past year. And thirdly, we measure the changes in workers' wage and bonuses. And we have done separate analysis on wages and on wage and bonus, and we got really similar results. So our key dependent variable is measures whether the workers has ever enrolled in a flexible work policy between 2017 and 2019. And if the workers have ever enrolled, this variable equals 1. If the worker do not enroll, this variable equals 0. And as a robustness check, we also checked the duration of the enrollment, and the results are largely similar with the result when we use this simple dummy variable. And here that we also measures we also include worker senior status, which is whether the employee is a senior workers, which means whether they are occupies rank 11 and higher before the policy was introduced. And here we include the interaction between flexible work policy dummy variable and the senior status. So therefore, so beta 1 in equation 2 measures flexible work policy's effect on junior workers, while beta 1 plus beta 3 measures flexible work time policy's effect on senior workers. And we run the model for the aggregated sample first, and then we do the separate analysis for men and women. And we also do a three-way interactions between flexible work policies and workers' senior status and gender. But here I'm going to only present the results by when we separate men and women. And lastly, all the models we controlled for workers' individual characteristics, such as their gender, their age, tenure, race, and their education and occupation before the policy was introduced. And lastly, we controlled for the group fixed effect. So here is the result when we run model 1 without interacting flexible work policy and the senior status. So generally, we find that although the previous research on flexible work policy has been highlighting the flexibility stigma effect, so in this organization, we do not find evidence that suggests that enrolling in flexible work policy is associated with either the career benefit or career penalty to both men and women. So we think that it may due to the fact that this organization was already taking the deliberate steps to be a woman and a family friendly employer. And then we ran the model 2 with the interaction between flexible work policy and the workers' organizational rank. So we find that even in this gender-friendly organization, enrolling in flexible work policy is associated with slower rate of promotion and slower wage growth for junior women. So in particular, we find that the change in organizational rank is about 3.3 lower for junior women who enrolled in the policy as compared to junior women who do not enroll. And in addition, junior women who enroll also received about $2,400 less annual wage and bonus compared to those people who do not enroll. So in summary, to summarize our finding in the quantitative analysis, we find that overall in this gender-friendly organization, those people who enrolled in flexible work policy do not face negative career consequences. And for both senior and junior men, they do not face career penalties. And there has been a really a small positive effect for senior women who enrolled the policy, because we observed that senior women who enrolled experienced a small improvement to their performance evaluation, but the junior women face negative career consequences in terms of slower promotions, as well as lower wage growth in this organization. And then we we go into our interviews and ethnographic observations in order to figure out, in order to find the potential mechanisms for why junior women's use of flexible work policies could decrease their likelihood of promotion and their wage growth. So in the interviews and field work, we find that different from senior women, who is usually seen as people who have made it to a certain extent and who are seen as the real workers, we find that junior women are usually more likely to be expected to be more available to be around their desk to help others with their project work. And in comparison, we find that junior men do not usually tell stories about the need to be so physically available in their work. And we also find that junior men receive much more respect from other people, particularly from senior men in these male-dominated workplaces. So to conclude, in summary, we believe that our study enriches our understanding of gender inequality by highlighting how junior and senior women may have a different organizational experience when they use the gender-friendly policies. And in addition, we think that our study could help us to rethink how the organizations could design and could implement flexible work policies in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, so this is all for our study. And unfortunately, two of our co-authors cannot be here, but we look forward to your comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. We can, since we don't have our discussant, but we do have one of the co-authors, good, who's able to join us. Any questions? Vanessa, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. Our other two co-authors are one is in Korea or one is maybe on the plane coming back from Korea and the other is in Germany. So it was sort of funny. Oh, you really cannot come. It's midnight for you right now. So.
Well, thank you for joining the session. Appreciate it. Any questions? I didn't see anything in the chat. Any questions on the paper? I guess I have one, which goes back to my earlier question of trade-offs of flexibility for wages. Can you measure what workers are willing to trade off flexibility for higher wages?
Yeah, I think we look at who enrolled in the policy first before we look at how does the flexibility affect workers' wage. And what we find is that there is a strong selection effect going on. So those who are enrolled in the flexible work policies are more likely to be women, and those people who are likely to receive lower wages before they enrolled in the policy, as you may expect, Morris. And also, I think the lower rank people, especially the admin and ops in this organization, are more likely to enroll in the policy. And also, we find a clear career penalty for junior women who enroll, because I think there has been a stronger stigma associated with enrolling into flexible work policy, especially for junior women in this organization. Vanessa, do you have other things to add to this?
This is sort of a traditional personnel economics question, so.
Right, I'm an organizational sociologist who's qualitative. I would just say, yeah, I mean, we don't have the perfect data to study, obviously, like the willingness to pay here, because everyone, had the opportunity to have, you didn't have to it's not like you're applying to a bunch of jobs and you're trading off in that way. The policy already is introduced to everyone in the organization. So I think, Duanyi, you answered it well.
Actually, Lynn has her hand up.
Thanks, Morris. Thanks, Duanyi. It's a very interesting study. I first read the draft of your paper May of last year when we were putting the session together. Very, very interesting. So I have a question, which is a follow-up question from Morris' question. So in your findings for the junior women, they encounter wage and benefits lost. And I see it's about more than $2,000 for junior women. So I'm just wondering, percentage-wise, say if we ran the log wage, the relationship could be it could be kind of in a different shape. So that's one thing. And the other thing is $2,000 may not be a big deal for senior women, but it could be a big deal for women at lower rank or lower ranks. So that could be if we can estimate a percentage impact on individuals' wage, on junior women's wage, that could be also something interesting. But the study is so important. I mean, it tells a very important story. Thank you.
Yeah, so do you suggest that we look at the log wages instead of look at the absolute wage?
I think both are meaningful. Both are very, very meaningful.
Sure, yeah.
But if we look at the log, which does show the percentage impact, that also kind of gives some kind of telling. It's because even with the ranks, because both the rank 10 and the rank 1 are in the lower rank category, but that means different things for different individuals. Rank 1, it could be the annual wage could be $30,000, and wage 10 could be I don't know, 70,000 or something. And then these 2,000 can mean different things for different income levels.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think in the paper, we have to better interpret the magnitude of our effect by looking at what do this increase mean for different group of workers. Yeah, thanks for the comment.
Yeah, and I see Tingting. Go ahead.
Thanks, Morris. And thank you, Duanyi. This is super interesting. I have a question, kind of like, can you provide some kind of like a background, kind of elaboration in terms of what kind of job these people are doing? Because I would imagine for a junior person, if they are team-based work, you need to be more, like as your kind of a qualitative research alluded to, like you need to be more physically present because you need to collaborate with your team members. But as a senior person, your flexible schedule may not has much of an impact in terms of your team performance because you are more likely as a manager position, you are more likely to supervise other people. So my question is really kind of like, is the impact of the kind of negative impact came from the stigma of like you choose a flexible schedule, or is this impact came from you choose this that is inconvenient with the rest of the team, that's why you get lower ranking in terms of performance? So like, I just try to get a sense in terms of the mechanism that really impact like kind of like this kind of results. Thank
You
you.
want me to answer, Duanyi?
Yeah, I think you know everyone
Okay.
in this organization.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with these people. So I think there's kind of two parts to your question. So the first is, I think implicitly you're saying, what does flexibility stigma mean? And in the literature, really, it frustrates me because people use it in different ways. Some people use it, and this is how we were using it in our presentation, just like a negative effect on your wage for using a policy without any reference to the particular mechanism. But other people use it more specifically as a stigma, it's stigma based, like you were saying in your comment, it's because, it's seen as bad. That's the particular thing. It doesn't actually have to do with any actual effect on the work. So to your question then, what is it? What is happening here? I think it's a little bit of both. So you're right. The people who are more junior in the organization, and I think we were trying to get at that a little with the presentation, they do have a greater expectation that you're there and present. But, and I think this is more of the traditional sort of stigma that we're seeing here, and it goes back to like, Cecilia Ridgway's work with Shelley Carroll, like this classic idea of that women are seen as lower status and particular gendered expectations for women, because we didn't see the same expectation that you're there, present, available for me to ask you a question with men who were junior. And I think that kind of general finding resonates with a lot of experimental and qualitative work that basically looks at expectations for women versus men. So I hope that answered it, but I can go into more detail. That's like,
well, thank you. And excellent discussion, but I want to get on to the last paper, make sure that we have time for both the paper and the discussant. And the last paper is Gender, Entrepreneurial Career Choice and Entrepreneurship Outcomes. And I guess Lynn will be presenting, but co-authored with Morley, Gunderson and Xiaogang He at Shanghai University. So Lynn, please go ahead.
Thank you, Morris. Let me share my screen. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to present our paper here today. It's a paper on gender, entrepreneurial career choice, and entrepreneurship outcomes. My co-authors are Morley Gunderson from University of Toronto. Morley today is not here. He's loved to come, but he's driving from Wisconsin to Toronto, back to Toronto today. He specifically asked me to say hello to everyone, and also big greetings to Morris and Erin for your support for the session, and also we look forward to hearing your comments and feedback to this paper. And the other co-author, Xiaogang, he's here among the participants today, so he will be able to answer some questions to help you to answer some questions. Okay, great. This paper again is about gender and economic outcomes in general. So gender inequity has attracted growing attention in recent years. However, we have seen gender disparity across all domains of health, education, economy, and politics. So these two charts on the right here shows like percentages of companies with female CEOs in the Fortune 500 company index and the Stocks Europe 600 companies index. So these are the most recent data, even though these percentages, 8% and 6%, both are big jumps from 2010, but still they're quite low. Like back in 2000, only 2 out of 500, the Fortune 500 companies had female CEOs. And back in 2010, the percentage was about 2 to 3%. Now we have 8%, which is great, but we know it's still low. In a similar vein, what we have seen here is that across countries, research have shown that women entrepreneurs have experienced more barriers for starting and growing new businesses compared to their male counterparts, and they have received less monetary returns to entrepreneurship. So in this study, we're looking at the gender differences in entrepreneurial career choices, as well as entrepreneurship outcomes in China. Next slide. So we're going to briefly talk about the findings in the literature and introduce the methodology and the analysis results, summarizing the finding, and then at the end, we'd like to propose some policy changes and have a general discussion on that. So before we look at the literature, we'd like to clarify the definition of entrepreneurship in this study. Generally speaking, there are two views, two types of definitions of entrepreneurship. One is more on the strategy management literature, like it's behavior view. It has the emphasis on the entrepreneur's innovative spirit. And the other view is occupational view, which defines an entrepreneur as someone who works for his or her own. And in this study, we adopt the occupational view of entrepreneurship, defining entrepreneurs as individuals who report their primary occupation as self-employment, which includes own entrepreneurs and the business owners who also hire others. So what does the literature say? So literature says that individuals choose to pursue an entrepreneurial career when there are opportunities and support for them to do so, and when the expected utility of self-employment exceeds the utility of wage employment. Research have also shown that these opportunities and utility functions tend to be different for men and women because there are differences in their access to human, financial, and social capital. Compared to men, women tend to choose an entrepreneurial career to gain more flexibility, to balance their work life and their family life, to reduce child care costs, and to steer away from discrimination in wage employment. So the gender literature on gender inequality employment in China shows that women in China experience various forms of gender inequality at work. And all kinds of different gender inequality. A recent study by Professor Cook and Zhang and his colleagues have shown some very interesting findings there. And particularly, very recently, since the implementation of the two-child policy in 2016 and the three-child policy in 2021, women have experienced more employment barriers and fewer career development opportunities because employers are worried about if we hire women, if we promote them, they may need to take leaves because they have more children, or they need to take time off to take care of their family. And those concerns lead to more employment barriers and lack of career development opportunities. And wage-wise, salary-wise, women have received lower pay than men across various occupations and throughout the income distribution. There are both a sticky floor effect and glass ceiling effects in the labor market in China, barriers that women have encountered. So now we'd like to kind of like zoom in to look at the gender differences in entrepreneurship in China. There haven't been much study that look into this particular topic, but the gender study on entrepreneurship and the family businesses have been able to shed some light on what's going on, with the entrepreneurship in China, and some studies have the gender control, so we're able to find some information there. So fewer women than men have chosen to pursue entrepreneurial career. Women entrepreneurs tend to encounter more barriers when trying to develop and expand their businesses. Very interestingly, more educated women and women with more work experience, they are less likely to pursue an entrepreneurial career. These findings seem to be different than in some other countries. And very recently, Morley and I, we did a study on women entrepreneurs, and we found that women entrepreneurs experience a double jeopardy, meaning they encountered more barriers and receive less returns compared to male entrepreneurs. And they also have lower earnings compared to themselves if they had chose a different career, being in a wage employment sector. So entrepreneurship may not very much return to women in that sense. So in this study, we are trying to look at these two questions. What are the factors that are associated with pursuing an entrepreneurial career in China? Are these factors different for men and women? And secondly, we'd like to look at whether there's a gender gap in entrepreneurial success. And if there is one, what are the factors that lead to the differences? Are these factors more likely to be characteristics associated with men and women that are different? Or like even for the same characteristics, men and women receive different returns. For example, the same family structure or the same size of the business, do men and women receive the same returns? So these are our two primary research questions. Our data, so the data set that we have is a face-to-face questionnaire interview survey, kind of the data set based on those interviews, but it's kind of questionnaires. Each interview took about an hour. A pre-test survey was done with a small sample, and some adaptations and revision were made after that. Stratified sampling was used, and at the end, we were able to collect the questionnaires from 4,600 entrepreneurs and a little bit fewer than 10,000 non-entrepreneurs in 31 provinces in rural China. Our co-author Xiaogang was a leader of the research team that collects the data. We restrict our sample to individuals who are between 16 and 65 years old. So at the end, in the analysis sample, we have 4,486 entrepreneurs and 8,643 non-entrepreneurs. The share of the women among entrepreneurs is lower than that in the non-entrepreneur group. So we did some summary statistics to compare the entrepreneur group and the non-entrepreneur group. So on most of these variables, as you can see, the entrepreneurs are more likely to be older, married, having more children, having younger kids, having elders in the household, having more political affiliations, more likely to be more likely to have migrant worker experience, and more likely to be in a professional association as a member of the professional association. So most variables are in the left column. And the entrepreneurs, the other two variables, having university degree and experience gender equity in the community, these are the two factors that are negatively associated with being an entrepreneur. We also compared the male entrepreneur group and the female entrepreneur group. The findings are also quite interesting. Male entrepreneurs are more likely to be older, having more years of education, having worked as migrant workers, having handicraft skills, be part of professional association, having more political affiliations. They tend to own larger firms, employing others, and have reported more profits in their business. Female entrepreneurs are more likely to have family members with political affiliations. They're more likely to report a religious belief and be a family that carries the largest name in a village. Again, a quick kind of note here, this data is in rural China, not the urban China, like most of labor econ studies have focused on. It's in the rural area. In the rural area, your last name means a lot of things. So in many villages, if you like what kind of last name you have shows what kind of status you have in that village. Like say, for example, my last name is XIU, and if I get married and it has to be my husband's village, I wouldn't be able to live in my own village. I would live in my husband's village, because that's where I can find a place to live. And then his last name would be very important if he carries a last name that is the largest last name, meaning that he would have relatives and more kind of support from the community in the village. So that does mean a lot of things, which we're going to show in the regression results. This is a significant factor in analysis. So our analysis. So basically what we are trying to do here, like we explained earlier, is to look at two different variables. The decision to choose an entrepreneurial career and the entrepreneurship outcomes. And we use individual characteristics, job-related characteristics, and community characteristics to-
You have 5 minutes to finish up.
Thank you, Maurice. To predict these two dependent variables. And I'm going to very briefly talk about results here. So that is, this table shows marginal impacts of these factors on choosing an entrepreneurial career. Being married, having a professional association membership, handicraft skills are associated with an entrepreneurial career for both men and women. More years of education and being a National People Congress deputy are significant factors for male entrepreneur for men only when they make the decision. And the next slide shows the impact of the family and community characteristics. And we find that for males, more children, having elders in the household, having self-employed parents, and experiencing gender equity in the family community are significantly associated with the men's decision to become an entrepreneur. For females, family factors such as having a last name in the village, the largest last name in the village, having family members who are NPC deputies, and having young children, elders in the household are significant. The next analysis that we did was to run analysis on the entrepreneurial earning equations for male and female entrepreneurs. The table is too large, so I just summarize the results here. The unadjusted gross gender earning gap is about 50%. It fell to 48% after controlling for the impact of observable individual family characteristics, and further down to about 15% after controlling for the impact of entrepreneurial characteristics. And when we look at these factors, they are basically in 4 categories. Factors that are significant for men, but not for women, factors that are significant for women, but not for men, factors that are important for both, and factors that are not significant for either men or women sample. So like looking at these factors, we find most of these characteristics are in the first 2 categories. They either work for men or they work for women. And there's only one factor that matters for both men and women, and that is the firm asset. And it's quite significant and quite large. A 1% change in the firm asset or the business asset is associated with 54% and 46% change in earnings for male and female entrepreneurs, respectively. So that's pretty large. Oh, so the last analysis results that I'm presenting here, including here today, is the details of the decomposition of the male-female earning gap in entrepreneurial.
2 minutes to finish up.
Thank you, Maurice. So on this table, basically what we show here is to look at the overall gender earning gap, which is 51% on the top of the table here. And in analysis, the analysis helps us to divide this overall gap into two portions. One that can be explained by the differences in these characteristics, and the other is what we call the return component. That basically shows for the same characteristics, the different returns that men and women receive. So what we can see from this table here is that about what is the number? I think I have it here, about 71%, this part out of the total, about 71% can be explained, and that's mainly driven by the business size. And about 29% that is in the unexplained or is a return component. And this part is mainly driven by two factors: family structure and the business asset, the business size.
A minute to go.
Meaning that for the same family structure and the business size, men and women receive different returns, and that drives the difference. A very quick summary, that's the last slide. My commitment to the time frame. So basically what we find here is that men and women's decision to choose entrepreneurial career are different, and they are impacted by different factors. Women encounter disadvantages in entrepreneurship. In terms of policy implications, our study find that policies support for child care, elder care, policies on helping women to find fundings and to help them to expand their businesses would help women entrepreneurs. So that's conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and informative presentation. The discussant for the paper is doing double duty. He's getting paid time and a half for doing the extra discussant, and that's Erin Sojourner. Welcome back again.
Thanks, Maury. I thought I was getting paid triple time. It's hard to tell the difference.
You're not a pilot, right?
Yeah, Lynn, congratulations. Again, this is a very interesting paper with an ambitious, unique data collection effort behind it. Like really great to start with a question and go out and generate new evidence and do the work to bring new data into the world that we can all use. So congratulations on that. I think Lynn did a good job explaining the research questions, basically how to understand gender differences and the propensity to choose entrepreneurship. How much of it is due to sort of gender differences in circumstances or gender differences in returns to circumstances. This is a pretty standard sort of method using a sort of Kitagawa Oaxaca blinder. And I think you had another person who I didn't know, but another fourth person attributed to the name of the method, sort of decomposition method. But this was a nice version of it. She explained, new survey. So, I think it's not a completely new question, but definitely new data, and for a huge important part of the world and a huge important set of people that we know very little about in this domain. I guess I wondered, and Lynn, maybe I wasn't reading close enough, but I didn't know how much, the extent to which this question was new, like the gender difference in propensity to choose entrepreneurship, and particularly like these factors as opposed to other kinds of explanatory factors, this kind of decomposition approach as opposed to maybe other approaches. So I think it would be useful to try to articulate, specifically what's new here, not just the data, but also in terms of the question, in terms of the method. It's fine if it's all just the data is new, but it's useful to help readers who maybe aren't as in the weeds on the literature. This, again, there's a very clear connection between the question and the data and the methods. And it's a very easy paper to read through. And, the sight line is very clear. And, they had a nice version of the decomposition analysis they used that's like robust to the omitted categories. And that was cool. I had a comment that's similar to the comment I gave earlier, but there's so many predictors in here, and sometimes you talk about them like they're related to each other. And it's always hard to interpret when there's so many different predictors. It's hard to know, hard to move from the level of the measure to the level of the theoretical factor when there's all these different measures, and they're not explicitly being pulled together. So, stuff like social network, the strength or the richness of your social network. There were a few different measures. There was like the last name, which was cool. I mean, that was a cool measure. But then there was also the stuff about the party members and the deputies, and your own and your families or your villages. And so I just would encourage you to consider if there's ways to aggregate these into like different measures of latent factors and then interpret the factors somehow, rather than the individual, like focus the discussion on those groups of variables. I think you can actually do it maybe without even creating a different kind of analysis, but almost reporting the results in groups, theoretically cohesive groups of variables, rather than maybe creating a new variable that aggregates them. I'm not sure the best way to do it. I know Alan Benson, my colleague, has a new paper where he looks at, it's a totally different setting, where he looks at 9box, which is like a employee evaluation tool where it's like performance and potential. But anyway, they also do a decomposition there of the gender impact on promotions. And so there's a lot of parallels between your analyses, and I would encourage you to check out their paper because it's similar in a lot of ways, but they made some different choices, and you might find those interesting, or you might have some feedback for him.
Just another minute to finish up.
Yeah. So these are like my two sort of harder lifts comments. I don't know whether these are possible, given your team and your context, but what you have sort of in what we have in mind, what it reminds me of is it's like a Roy model, which is the sort of standard occupational choice model, where everybody has like two latent payoffs, in different occupations, and they choose their occupation based on their latent payoff. And there's a great chapter in the Handbook of Labor Economics by Eric French and Chris Tabor that goes through Roy models, and it's very relevant to this, so you might check that out. the other thing is like you have a lot of predictors. You know, a problem with the decomposition methods is that you know, it's not causal. You have to make an assumption about the errors being orthogonal. But I just would wonder if you can identify any policy shocks or any
We need
environmental
to finish up.
shocks.
We're going to be taken offline soon. So
Okay.
thank you.
Any environmental shocks or policy shocks that would, you know, let you say something about one of these factors or two of these factors in particular. That would be a different kind of paper, but you're set up to do it. Thanks.
Thank you. Just want to leave a few minutes open for comments. I know there were responses. I wanted to leave the last 5 minutes for any comments, but thank you, Erin, for an excellent set of comments that are very insightful and I'm sure very helpful.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much. These comments are super, super helpful. And Morley told me to take detailed notes from your comments. So I'm writing down, and I also took a screenshot of your comments slide, if you don't mind. And I will dig into it. Like all those comments are very, very thoughtful, especially the royal model. Because when I was writing up the draft, the big concern to me was the selection problem. And I thank you for the comments. I will dig into it.
I see Tingting has hand up.
Thanks. Super interesting topic. I just kind of like, I think I have a similar things with Erin's comment about like, you know, having all those things linked together, build a latent construct. But I came from a very different kind of angle. I was thinking when you do your presentation, I was thinking the intra-household decision-making, right? Because a lot of things that you mentioned makes perfect sense to me. The rural China setting, they have the male still as the dominant kind of like, you know, breadwinners in the household, and the female, if they want to go choose an entrepreneur path, you know, you need to have the network, you need to have a kind of like a stable income source from the husband, you know, all those things, which kind of like reflect in your predictors. So is there any way that you can put this kind of like, you know, conceptual framework into your discussion that build a kind of like a latent construct as Erin suggested? That probably could potentially kind of like strengthen your theoretical building and to see, okay, this is the setting that fits into this particular kind of environment and circumstances. That's why women are more likely to pursue an entrepreneur path, and then they get a potentially higher return. That's just my thought on that.
Thank you, Tingting. That's an excellent comment. And I agree. I totally agree and agree with you and Erin on this, because we have a lot of variables as predictors, as the independent variables out there. And it would make a lot of sense to put them into different buckets. As Erin said, you know, there are generally two ways to do it. In this preliminary analysis, we basically look at the individual variables, and towards in the discussion part and in the last analysis of decomposition, I kind of group some together, like family structure, stuff like that, like having kids, having elders. But you know, a more thorough work need to be done on this. And I will also look into latent variable analysis, like possibly structural equation modeling or something like that, to look at whether it would make sense to both together like latent variables that like social network or the family structure as kind of bucket variable, like as bucket variables, categorical variable, not categorical, but to that include like you know all kind of different variables out there. Thank you, Tingting.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I think we're right on time. And I want to thank Lynn for organizing the session. We had some terrific papers. Want to thank the presenters. I assume you've gotten some comments from John McCarthy, who unfortunately couldn't make it due to family issues. And especially thank Erin Sojourner for his very thoughtful and insightful comments on two papers, which again, above and beyond the call of duty. So thank you very much for a very interesting, informative, and provocative set of comments and discussion. And I wish you a good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. And hopefully we'll get to meet again in person next time for LYRA and ASSA. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morris, for chairing the
Thank you,
session.
Morris. Thank you,
My
Erin.
pleasure.
Thank you.